Hey everyone, and welcome back to another explainer. Today we are setting out on a truly epic journey. I want you to imagine the history of human thought, not just as, a dry timeline of dates, but as a vast, powerful river. A river of ideas that carved its way through ancient landscapes, nourishing entirely different cultures as it flowed. In this explainer, we're going to trace these eternal mountains and rivers of Eastern philosophy. We're going to map out exactly how some of the most profound ideas in human history were born, how they evolved, and how they actually migrated across entire continents. It is an absolutely fascinating flow of wisdom, and I'm super excited to guide you through it today.
So our map for this journey today is a text called The Golden Laws, written by Ryuho Okawa. Now, just a quick heads up to be completely clear here, this book presents a highly unique, spiritually driven view of world history. It doesn't just look at standard historical events, it reports on a vast, esoteric spiritual history. It literally traces the supposed reincarnations of great thinkers and the hidden cosmic plans behind major religious movements. Now, as always, my goal here isn't to ask you to believe every single claim, but to impartially break down the fascinating structure of the ideas presented in this source material. We're going to examine exactly how this text charts the spiritual lineage of the East.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for the explainer. First, we'll look at the source of the Orient. Then, the pillars of Shakyamuni Buddhism. From there, wisdom flows to China, where we'll explore Confucius and universal love. And finally, we'll see how the eternal flame continues.
All right, Section 1, the source of the Orient, looking at ancient India's roots.
Let's begin our journey right at the very spring from which this great philosophical river begins to flow, which is ancient India. According to the source, ancient India was this massive melting pot of incredibly diverse ideas. Long before Buddhism became a dominant force, the spiritual landscape was fiercely debated. On one side, you had figures like Vardhamana, also known as Mahavira, who promoted Jainism. And this path emphasized strict asceticism, rigorous physical discipline, and severe self-restraint as the only real way to spiritual salvation. But then, right alongside this, you had totally contrasting views, like those of Ajita. Ajita promoted an early form of materialism and empiricism. He argued that human beings are made of only earth, water, fire, and wind, and he pretty much dismissed those grand spiritual hierarchies entirely. This perfectly illustrates just how vibrant and contested the intellectual soil of ancient India truly was.
Moving down the river to Section 2, Pillars of Shakyamuni Buddhism, covering the foundational ideology. So moving downstream from that ancient ideological battleground, we arrive at the foundational teachings of Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha. The source breaks his vast ideology down into highly structured, manageable pillars. The first major pillar presented in the text is this profound distinction between the real world and the phenomenal world. The source explains that Shakyamuni constantly taught that this three-dimensional world we live in is really just a temporary, phenomenal shadow. It's essentially merely a shadow picture cast by the eternal, real world, which is the spiritual realm where we exist before birth and return after death. Understanding that our current daily struggles are just illusions on a temporary screen is basically the first step to escaping suffering.
And this brilliantly illustrates the highly practical side of his teachings. Because once you understand the world is just a shadow, how do you actually live in it? Well, the text highlights the Eightfold Path as the ultimate standard for living. Now, this isn't just a basic list of rules, it's a diagnostic tool. The source describes it as a framework for humans to reflect on their past mistakes and systematically build a better future. By constantly aligning your thoughts, your speech, and your daily livelihood with these 8 principles, you actively correct your soul's trajectory.
The source also outlines the paramitas, focusing heavily on a concept that translates roughly to benefiting oneself is immediately benefiting others. It's this incredibly beautiful idea that spiritual discipline actually isn't selfish. When you cultivate deep inner wisdom and compassion, that energy naturally overflows. You literally can't help but uplift everyone around you. Your internal enlightenment actually becomes a public service.
Okay, Section 3, Wisdom Flows to China, where we track the migration of ideas.
Now, rivers never just stay in one place, right? As the centuries passed, that vibrant Buddhist wisdom found a new, powerful channel flowing eastward into the vast, fertile landscape of China. Now, what's really interesting here is how the source text actually explains this migration, because it doesn't just track the movement of books or wandering monks. It tracks the reincarnation of specific souls. The text claims that a grand spiritual lineage physically migrated across centuries. For instance, it reports that Vasubandhu, a major Indian Buddhist philosopher, was reborn in China as the great thinker Lu Shongshan. Furthermore, it claims that Bodhidharma, the famous monk who brought Zen to China and supposedly stared at a wall for 9 years, was later reborn in modern Japan as D.T. Suzuki, the very man who brought Zen to the Western world. So it presents history as this highly coordinated spiritual relay race of souls.
During this incredible flourishing of thought in China, the source highlights a vivid anecdote about a monk named Tian Tai Ziyi. He became famous for systematizing the massive, really complex teachings of the Lotus Sutra. But according to the text, this wasn't just some academic achievement. It was actually sparked by a profound mystical dream at dawn, where Ziyi was visited directly by Shakyamuni and 2 great bodhisattvas. The text says this dream served as a direct spiritual transmission, basically empowering him to organize Buddhist thought for the Chinese mind.
Section 4. Confucius and Universal Love, looking at the indigenous philosophy of China.
As Buddhist thought flowed into China, it encountered an already deeply established current of indigenous Chinese philosophy. So let's shift our focus to the great historical debates that shaped the nation's moral compass. The text outlines this fascinating contrast between 2 philosophical titans. On one side, we have Confucius, who believed that a peaceful society required strict order, propriety, and a structured, graded benevolence, basically meaning your duty is to your family first and then to society. But then, the text introduces Mazi, who fiercely opposed this. Mazi argued for a radical universal love and absolute equality, demanding that people love total strangers just as much as their own family, and he strongly advocated for anti-war policies.
Despite their intense differences, the depth of this ancient Chinese wisdom is just astounding. The text points out an incredible interaction between Confucius and his disciple Zigong. When asked for a single guiding principle for life, Confucius replied, "Do not do unto others what you would not want others to do unto you." The source explicitly notes the striking, almost verbatim similarity between this ancient Chinese wisdom and the golden rule taught by Jesus Christ centuries later in the West.
And, actually, speaking of Jesus Christ, the source makes one of its most esoteric claims right here. To explain Moji's radical, somewhat un-Chinese concept of universal love, the text asserts that Moji was actually a past incarnation of a portion of Jesus Christ's soul. According to the book's spiritual history, this soul incarnated in China to lay the groundwork for an ideology of love long before Jesus of Nazareth was even born in the Middle East. Again, I am just reporting the framework of the text here, but it perfectly illustrates how the author connects these seemingly disparate global philosophies into one continuous grand narrative.
Finally, Section 5, the eternal flame continues. Let's look to the future. So, where does this river flow next? The final section of our explainer looks ahead, showing how the source projects these ancient teachings into our distant future, dealing specifically with the philosophy of leisure. See, the book concludes with a prophecy. It warns that in the future, as automation gives humanity massive, unprecedented amounts of leisure time, people will be tempted to fall into degradation and meaningless pleasure. To combat this, the text predicts a brand new philosophical framework will emerge around the year 2360 AD. Interestingly, it claims this future teaching will be firmly rooted in foundational Confucian ideals. It'll be built on 3 steps. First, a dedication to continuous lifelong learning. Second, establishing a spiritual order where people respect others based on their inner spiritual maturity. And third, the principle of mutual self-enlightenment, where we constantly refine ourselves to uplift society. The eternal flame of these ancient ideas, particularly Confucianism, will supposedly be exactly what saves the future.
Which brings us to the end of our journey down the river today, and leaves us with a pretty vital question to ponder. We've seen the intense inner discipline of the Eightfold Path, and the outward-facing societal love debated by Confucius and Mozi. So how can you balance that strict internal self-discipline of Buddhism with the profound, active societal love of Chinese philosophy to navigate your own complex modern life? The river of wisdom hasn't stopped flowing. It's right in front of you, just waiting for you to drink from it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking clarity, and I will see you in the next one.